Now, I recently posted an update regarding the tipping situation in New York regarding Uber Eats drivers, DoorDash drivers, Grubhub drivers, and more. And this comment was the main comment I really focused on of one person explaining that their earnings had increased. Now, I'm doing a second update video as with a full-on article talking about all the specifics of how it's really affected delivery drivers. The title of this article, which I know is a bit cut off, says Uber, DoorDash make tipping deliveries harder after New York City wage law. So you can see right here, right away, New York delivery drivers are seeing their first paychecks under a new hard-won minimum wage mandate, but they're not ready to celebrate just yet. Technically, right? Now, like I mentioned in the first update video, I got one example, there's only one, of one delivery driver saying, hey, after what happened in New York City, after the new wage law, I'm now making, on average, $14 more an hour. Now, in case you don't know what happened, I'm with this in 1 second. Basically, when it comes to tipping, when it comes to delivery drivers, one, you now tip at the end of the delivery. So after you get to the delivery, as opposed to before, right? In addition, second big thing is delivery drivers now have minimum hourly guarantees. So going on here, you can see right here, it says at least, let's say, $18 an hour, which went into effect December 4th. So these are the exact time of this video. It's been about a couple weeks to see, okay, how's this really impacting drivers? Is it good? Is it bad? Do people like it? Do people not? And you can see it's resulted in higher overall earnings in the first week, according to receipts from drivers sent to Bloomberg and posted on social media sites. Now, one thing that Uber Eats did, DoorDash did, Grubhub did, is they made changes when it comes to the fact that they're now tacking on extra fees. One thing I do want to say as a side note too, because I did get a comment about this. Someone said, hey, Mark, why do you mention Uber Eats and DoorDash a lot, but not Grubhub? Actually, want to hear something funny? In case you're curious, I like to be ultra transparent on my videos. It actually comes down to SEO. There's significantly more searches for Uber Eats and DoorDash than Grubhub, so it's easier for me to just mention those two as opposed to going down this list. Just want to say that as a side note because I did get a comment about that. But you can see right here, they're making changes to their apps that workers say will reduce their hours and can limit potential earnings in the long run. So like I said, this has only been existing, it's really been in effect for a couple weeks. So it is, let's say, the long-term implications. But right now, things are looking good, right? Now, the biggest thing, like I said, is coming around tipping. As a result of the new law, they'll have to put on increased costs onto consumers in the form of added fees. So to not overwhelm customers with their order being so expensive when ordering, both companies moved the prompt for tipping on the app to appear after customers have already placed their orders, which could mean fewer tips for drivers. DoorDash said the move is necessary, quote unquote, to ensure our platform remains affordable for all New Yorkers. To an extent, I kind of, and I just would kind of understand that. But honestly, I think this is a good thing, and I'll tell you why. In the first video I posted about this, I was worried, I'm like, oh man, tips are a huge deal for delivery drivers. However, when looking at this article and other articles and seeing the comments now I'm getting on this channel, let's be honest, as a driver, you don't care about tips as how much money you're making. Like if I said to you, hey, would you rather make $30 an hour and get no tips or $15 an hour and get tips? I think 100% of people would say, oh, the $30 an hour. I don't care about as many tips as I get per se, as more that I get paid the amount that I should be getting paid. And in this situation, for when it seems like drivers, even though, yeah, you might get less tips now, drivers are going to be making more money than before. Another thing, I got a lot of comments on some of my videos of people who like to don't do delivery driving, but order Uber Eats, or they're consumers of Uber Eats, DoorDash, Grubhub, etc. And one thing they say is, they say, look, I actually prefer tipping after getting my delivery, which I think makes sense. Delivery driving is the only thing, if you think about it, that you proactively tip somebody before it even happens. And if you think about it logically, pure logic, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. I know a lot of delivery drivers don't like to hear this, but I mean, think about it. There's good delivery drivers, there's bad ones. That'd be like me going to a bar saying, hey, here's your tip, let me reverse that. It'd be like me going to a bar and the bartender saying, hey, before I make you your drink, give me a tip right now. I'd be like, why would I tip you right now? You haven't made my drink. How do I know it's good? How do I know it's bad? What if your service is really horrible, right? Like I always tip 20%, but even so, right? Like it'd be the same thing for almost anything else. Delivery driving is the only thing they do tip proactively as opposed to retroactively. And in my mind, not only is this good because drivers are going to make more money hourly, given the new law, But also, you might even make continual more money from drivers tipping you retroactively if you deliver it and you're a good delivery driver, right? Right here, higher wages also mean that the companies won't be able to recruit as many workers, they said, which squeezes more deliveries out of fewer drivers. That could be an issue. I have talked in a bunch of videos about next year in 2024, there being a lot of Uber and Lyft drivers on the road. But in addition to that, like I mentioned on the videos, this also includes delivery drivers as well. With more people signing up for gig economy jobs than ever, I can't see it being a benefit in any way, shape, or form to anybody that there's going to be more rideshare drivers in addition to more delivery drivers, right? In addition, moving the tipping option will discourage drivers from cherry-picking quote-unquote deliveries based on the size of the tip, right? Now, this is something I know a lot of delivery drivers do. I've gotten these comments on this channel. I can be honest with me as a side note, I don't like delivery driving. I love driving for Lyft and Uber when I did it. Granted, the pay was a lot better back in the day, but delivery driving just wasn't my thing. However, I know some people who love it, and this is a big thing they mention. Like, if they know they're going to get a good tip, or the person tips well right in the beginning, they're like, oh, of course I'm going to accept this one delivery. But in this case, they can't really do that, or delivery drivers can't do that anymore. But even still, the only reason why delivery drivers were cherry picking is because they weren't making enough money and they knew they needed that good tip to at least make a livable wage. Now it's kind of all set, right? As you can see, instead of chasing orders with the highest tips, drivers will be obligated to take any order, really, that comes up or risk having only limited access to the platform. So this is going to get interesting. Tips, which used to account for as much as half of drivers' total weekly earnings, now make up only 5 to 15%. So at first, you're like, wow, because they only make up 5 to 15%, it's not looking good. Drivers are not going to be paid what they should be getting paid. In addition, drivers reported getting more orders that had no tips. But here's the big thing. Even though their overall earnings have increased. Now, Uber has added, and I know DoorDash did follow suit, Uber added a $2 fee to all delivery orders and informs customers that tipping remains optional. I gotta be honest, I mentioned that before. I don't know why they did that, to be honest. It's kind of weird. And DoorDash is planning to increase the fees in coming months. I think they already did that, to be honest. But here's the thing. The new pay is much better than what it was before, but it's not ideal wage for New York. This is something you could argue about. I got a comment, which actually was it was a short comment, but a very well kind of thought out comment. And they said, Uber, Lyft, Uber Eats, DoorDash, ride sharing and delivery driving are part-time gigs that some people happen to do full-time. And I thought that was a very intriguing comment. I'm probably going to do an entire video dedicated just to that thought and that comment because there is some truth to that. Like, some people could argue, like, hey, Uber and Lyft was never meant to be something to fully live off of. Uber Eats, you were never meant to fully live off it, right? Although you could argue that. I think that's a very intriguing point. I think there's pros and cons. I think there's two sides of that argument, but it is very interesting because you could say, like, yeah, it's not an ideal wage for New York, but was it ever supposed to be? Again, I don't agree or disagree, but again, it's always important to look at both sides, right? This is, of course, tips drive. Now here, okay, prior to the minimum wage rule, delivery app workers took about $11 per hour with tips, or about $4 per hour without, right? So that's really, really low. Now going down here, of course, they paid a bunch of money in terms of this lawsuit. In addition, there's a bunch of different things, offering paid sick leave, improving hiring, and earning notices, right? So going down here, the regulations often come at a cost for workers as the companies seek to compensate to protect earnings. Let's see. The minimum wage is set to rise to almost $20 an hour by April 2025. So to me, this is a big thing that drivers are going to make at least $20 an hour. When going up here, they were taking home $11 per hour with tips. 11 is way less than if I scroll all the way back up than 18. In addition, on that video that I posted before in terms of this recap, the comment that I got, the person basically mentioned, like, hey, I'm now making up to $29 an hour in terms of working hours. That's huge, right? And I know they're going to say this, policies have consequences, and these changes come as a direct result of extreme earnings, standard imposed in New York City. Yeah. I mean, whatever, and of course, Prop 22, I've mentioned this in California. We had something a bit similar They promised to establish a pay floor for drivers, found that the law not only made drivers work more hours to make equivalent earnings, it also diminished drivers' control over their work. That was a big thing. I knew a lot of drivers, which is funny, when Prop 22 came out, before it got voted on, Uber and Lyft spent millions. I don't care. It was like tens of millions of dollars in ads for drivers to stay as independent contractors. And a lot of drivers were for it. And it says that they want to stay as independent contractors. After Prop 22, 90% of the drivers I talked to say, I regret it. I've heard the word regret a lot. And you can see here that was probably because the companies, rescinded features such as the ability to filter out low-paying rides, undercutting promises that drivers can, quote-unquote, be their own boss, and a lot more, right? And a lot more. And going down here now, the base pay of $18 an hour includes some waiting time between orders, but how much idle time, which can be nearly 40% of a delivery shift, is unclear. So it is kind of tricky, but what's interesting is the law also allows an alternative rate of $30 per hour only for the time that the driver is on a trip to complete a delivery without compensating for the idle time. The companies can choose which rate to pay drivers. Uber will make that decision on a weekly basis. And the week ended on December 11th. It gave drivers $30 an hour, as did DoorDash. Overall, with all that data coming into play, with more drivers talking about this and everything, I just think this is a win for drivers. But I'm also going to say, I think it's a win for people ordering. I've mentioned this in other videos that this is a very hot topic. And like, I want to stress, I've said this a lot, but I do have to stress this, especially if it's the first time of you watching one of my videos. You may be saying, hey, this is only in New York. Why does it affect me? When something happens in New York or California, it has a massive ripple effect around the country. And when it comes to this, like I said, I think it's a win-win. It's a win for drivers. I think, one, you're making more money an hour. That's the number one thing for a lot of drivers. In addition, you get benefits, like I mentioned before. But I think another thing, too, is it's a more consistent amount. With tips, you never really know how much money you're going to make. You could do one day and get a ton in tips. You're like, oh, this is a great day. Another day, you could get net tips. You're like, oh, man, I gotta maybe work more tomorrow or whatever. With this, you feel like it's a more consistent thing, right? I think that's a big thing that's huge. And the third thing I want to say is a win-win, talking now about the other side, is for me ordering now. When I order, like, say, Uber Eats or whatever, let's say my order is $30. On average, for that $30, I'm going to give a $2 extra fee that goes to this new wage law, right? Because Uber and DoorDash and Grubhub is charging a little bit more. Now, that brings my order from $30 to $32, right? I'm spending $32 for whatever I ordered. However, beforehand, if let's say I was going to tip in the beginning, I do 30, 20%, 36. So the consumer ordering Uber Eats or DoorDash or Grubhub would pay 36 for the order, and the driver would get less money. On average, as you saw in New York City, about $11-ish an hour, give or take. Lose-lose. In this case, though, the consumer is going to spend $32 for that order. Like, say they don't tip, for example. Worst case scenario, let's say they don't tip. They give no tip at all. They're spending only $32 an hour. Excuse me, they're spending $32, $4 less than before. And the driver, on average, might get anywhere between $18 to $30 an hour, depending on how Uber and DoorDash and Grubhub want to do out their finances. So the drivers are making more money an hour, and the people ordering, if anything, are spending less money as well. It's a win-win. And on top of this, remember, even though the person's spending less money and the drivers are getting more, they could still get even more than that if people are going to be tipping and everything, right? And of course, I think when it comes to anything, and I've mentioned this in a lot of other videos, I might do a video just about tipping culture in general because it's gotten very ridiculous, as we all know. I think I just saw, it was like last night, I saw like one of those funny Trevor Wallace videos of him making a bunch of jokes about, there's a bunch of like funny situations. He's just super funny, that guy, of him like doing something, someone flipping the iPad around or the tablet being like, so pick the amount. And you're like, wait, what? Right? So tipping's gotten kind of ridiculous, as we all know. But I do think the one issue when it comes to ride sharing, more than anything, is that there's no social pressure for someone to tip, right? And I think that's what causes it, on the other end, of people tipping with that tablet situation in situations they probably normally wouldn't. Now, translating that from ride sharing to now delivery driving, as we're talking about, with delivery driving, there was a social pressure. Even though the delivery driver wasn't there in front of you, you would always have to tip in the beginning because they're bringing their food to you and you tip proactively. In this case, you're tipping retroactively, and it could be that some people feel like, well, they're not going to know if I tipped them or not I'm not going to get in trouble if I tip them or not. It's more of like the moral, doing the quote-unquote right thing. That's the best way to phrase that. And to some people, they may look at that as purely optional. But to me, at the end of the day, and again, my first video on this was very pessimistic. When I heard about this, was like, shoot, not getting tips is going to affect a lot of drivers. Now, I've actually completely changed my stance, where I think this is super optimistic, where it's like, hey, who cares? Yeah, should people be tipping you? Of course. Of course. But if they don't, who cares? Because in this case, one, not only are you making more money, which is, let's be honest, the number one thing when it comes to people working in the gig economy, but two, and even more so, now it's way more reliable, and you don't have to worry about your, let's say, income being all over the place. You know you're going to make a very consistent amount at least. This is the bare minimum you're going to make, whether it's $18 an hour, or let's say $29 an hour, or whatever. You know you're going to make significantly more money than before. And if some tips you, cool. If not, no big deal, because, hey, you're making way more consistent money. And at the end of the day, the most important thing, you have more money now in your pocket as a result of this wage law.